This is the first roundtable that we're hosting on the future of wine collecting. We have plans in the works to do more of these and would love to have more people attend those as well. But I'm so thrilled that we have Elin and Oz for our maiden voyage. So I'm going to kick it off just by asking you each in a couple minutes to just tell us your personal stories. We want to hear about how you got into wine and wine collecting. So we'll start with that. So Oz, why don't you go first?
Oh gosh, how did I start wine collecting? I think the point is I loved wine and I simply couldn't drink it as fast as I bought it. So I had to become a collector. I was up at the University at Oxford, and I remember I'd been told that the best place to store wine was somewhere which was cool and dark and had no vibration. So I stored it under my bed, which is a terrible comment on my social life at Oxford, to be honest, but it was the coolest, darkest, and least vibrated place in the whole of my college. And as it went on, I became an actor and a singer, and I was wandering around the world, and I kept on buying stuff, and I kept thinking, this is going to be because I'm going to have fantastic dinner parties when I get older, when I have time, when I settle down. Well, this never really happened, and I've become somebody who's like a gannet. I still can't resist buying stuff. I find that I think to myself, there is a wonderful world of wine out there, and I want all of it. Now I've got my cases of Bordeaux, I've got my cases of Burgundy, and God knows what, going back to the 80s, the 70s. They're over there. I'll show you now what this is what I call my working cellar. This is my working study. All these books I haven't read yet. What about all these wines I haven't read? Look, I mean, here, this is what it is. This is just bottle after bottle, single stuff, and it could be anything. What have we got here? Oh, that's a bottle of Van de Pie from Hermitage. Haven't seen one of those for a while. This is a bottle of Saperavi from a bishop in Georgia. This is Petit Arvin from Switzerland. This is, oh God, this is Cabernet Sauvignon from I don't know, Ukraine. Hey, ever seen one of those? This is Barburi from Turkey. That's a couple of Ponte Canis down there, just in case you're getting worried. This is Michel's Vaudezir 9.
Oh, I think we lost Oz. Did everybody else lose Oz? Yeah. I think his camera got too excited looking at all of those wines. While we're waiting for him to come back, Elin, why don't you chime in with your story?
Well, I'll just jump right in and say, really, my story is a lot like Oz's. The fact is, I didn't really ever start with the idea I was going to be collecting wine. I just started buying wine and putting in my cellar and putting more in my cellar. And suddenly I had boxes all over the place, which were not nearly as well organized as what you people are offering everyone. I think I'm really like a lot of wine drinkers. They just start amassing things and they don't even know what they have. And I have had that experience where later on, I think, oh my God, where did this wine come from? When did I buy that? You know, why did I buy it? And tasting it and thinking, oh, yes, that's why I bought it. So I will just say one thing, though, that you can have very, very nice surprises when you start collecting wine. Very early along in the late 80s, somebody offered my husband and me a case of 1982 Chateau Lafleur. And we didn't know a lot about Chateau Lafleur, but we thought, God, it sounds really good. And $300, it's an awful lot, but let's just go for it. So just so you know, approximately 14 years ago or so, I sold that case of wine and I bought a car. So you can have these very nice surprises if you collect wine. Just so you know, I'm not saying that's the reason to collect. And just so you know, I'm not guaranteeing that that will happen to you, but it could. So what I do now and how my tastes evolved and the evolution of my collecting, if you will, is number one, I love the thrill of the chase. I love to think about some wine that I haven't tasted that's really rare and see if I can find it somewhere. So if I'm traveling, when you used to be able to travel, I would always go into local shops and see if there was something interesting. The second thing is that I collect for finding the new superstars. The new superstars in regions, the new superstar winemakers, the things that I want to discover and I don't know about yet. And that's another joy of collecting, which is you start looking at wine in a different way. Like, maybe I should taste this. Maybe I should buy this. Maybe I should buy 3 Refoscos because I really don't know enough about Refosco. So that's another aspect. And the third reason I collect and have collected over the years is for special experiences, what I call special experiences. Somebody I visited, like Peter Jakob Kuhn in Germany, who is the most incredibly lovely man, and his wonderful family and his fabulous, fabulous wines that I enjoyed with him over a whole afternoon, having lunch and looking out over his vines and hearing the stories about his life and what he thinks about wine. And so every time I pull out a bottle from my cellar that I've collected of his wines, I think about the times that I visited him and what a wonderful human being he is. And I enjoy them all over again, not just the taste, but also the memory of the people. So that's sort of where I am on collecting.
And I think that's such a wonderful story. And it's actually going to tee up the next question that I have, because what you spoke about the story of the wine and the experience and the memory that's embedded in the bottle in your cellar, I think is exactly what we get so excited about. And I'm actually going to shift to a couple controversial topics, which are maybe not so in line with that thinking, and get both of your thoughts. So the first is, I want to ask about the topic of drink windows, because this is something we think about at InVintory quite a lot. And our collectors often comment that this is important to them. They want to know when to drink their wines or when their wines are drinking well. But in keeping with our whole philosophy of presenting wine well, we know that it's just not true that a wine expires in a given year, right? It doesn't fall off like yogurt. So the notion of drink windows as goalposts is something that doesn't quite sit well with us. But it's also, again, something that people are curious about when best to drink. So Oz, I see you're back. I'm going to kick this first to you. What are your thoughts on drink windows and how better to potentially think about them?
Funnily enough, thinking about this, I went and just checked up on some old Wine Spectators and some old Robert Parker stuff. And I've realized that it's sort of guesswork, because when the wine is in those, let's say 30, 40 years ago, when the wine was tannic and fairly heavy, on the whole, the guys would say, hey, put 30 or 40 years on this for aging. And I know those wines now, let's say the 82s, the 83s, the 85s, and they're sort of still at a peak. But you look at, I shouldn't have included 83 there, because 83, everybody said, oh, they're done. That's a European type vintage. That they were saying it's finished by 2000. It's finished by 1998. Well, the 83s are in spectacular form now and are probably more exciting, if you like, old Bordeaux than the 82s are at the moment. Modern wine is different. It's not like it was in the 1980s and the 1990s. When we come to the noughties, and this starts to spread further and further from Bordeaux into Burgundy, the Rhone, then into Piedmont, into Tuscany, obviously into California and parts of Australia, South Africa, wherever. So much wine has been affected and infected by super ripeness, by over excessive physiological ripeness, by a mad pursuit of big flavor and big alcohol and big effect, that, to be honest, a drinking window becomes rather pointless, because those kind of wines are actually, if you like instant gratification, if you like a blast of flavor, if you want to sort of make the thing wash over your palate, well, it's perfectly good at 2 years old. Most modern Barolo is perfectly good at 4 or 5 years old. Modern Bordeaux is perfectly good at 4 or 5 years old. Modern Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa is perfectly good at 2 or 3 years old. It will age. There's no question it'll age. It's not going to fall to be. The very big beasts of the noughties are starting to crumble away. But a super ripe wine, it will age, but will it go anywhere? I don't think it'll just become an older version of itself. Will it transform? Will it entrance? Will it astonish? That's a major problem with drinking windows. You could almost put with a lot of drinking windows, 2 or 3 years old to I don't know when, but don't fret, it's not gonna die. The latest movement towards wines at lower alcohols, 12.5, 13, 12.5, 12, that'll be very interesting, because actually a 12.5 wine now is not at all like a 12.5% wine from 30 or 40 years ago. And we don't really know how that will age, but 12.5 wines from 40 years ago are still kicking. So drinking windows, I think collectors like them. I talk about them myself, but I think they are throwing stuff up in the air and catching it as it comes down.
Well, it sounds like you're also very keen about the surprise, and that's to a point that I think Elin made as well. Part of the surprise and the excitement is trying the wine over that time. So I want to pick up on something you said about the ripeness and the changes you're observing, and kick a different question to Elin. Elin, can you comment on how you think the universe of collectible wines has changed? Because it seems to be tied in with this idea that, flavor profiles are potentially changing.
Well, I think, well, first of all, yes, I totally agree that collecting is changing. It's changing because there used to be just a handful of wines, a handful of regions that people talked about collecting. They talked about collecting Bordeaux. They talked about collecting vintage port. Then later people were collecting Burgundy, and also some people were collecting champagne. Although, quite honestly, drinking older champagne is really, really pretty much a UK thing in my experience. Not that I don't love them, I do, but I think collectors in the UK are doing it. So those were the things you collected because those were the important wines and the important regions. Now we have a whole different ballgame. Great wines are being made everywhere in the world. They're being made great wines. You can find great wines in California, Argentina, Chile, Spain, Italy, all over the place. There are these great wines. And so along with that is a recognition that a lot of these wines are collectible. They're going to go, some of them improve with age. And furthermore, there are things that they'll at least last 5 years. So that there's been this broadening of what is considered a collectible wine. And just think about this one thing. LiveX, which is this market platform, this fine wine market platform that looks at all the ideas about collectability and increases in prices and so on. Even 11 years ago or so, there were a tiny number of California wines that were traded on that platform as collectibles. So in the last 5 years, I wrote this down because I didn't want to forget the exact number. They now have 200 California wines on that are trading on that platform. And that is an 809% jump over the last 5 years. So that is just like one example. But I would also single out Italy, because I can remember when no one in people's idea of an Italian wine was something that had a little straw basket over it. It wasn't really considered a fine wine, even though there were great Brunellos, there were great Barolos. And that also has changed. There are people who just want to collect Italian wines, and it's not even now just Barolo and Barbaresco and Super Tuscans. It's now also things like Valentini's Montepulciano d'Abruzzo from Abruzzo, which, you know, probably no one in America really knew exactly where Abruzzo was, you know, 15 years ago. So this broadening has changed what people think is going to be interesting to collect. And I think it's fabulous, because not all of us think the same way. Not all of us taste the same way. We all have personal preferences. And this sort of opens the doors wide to people to say, you know, the wine world is bigger than you think. It's more interesting than you think. It's more delicious than you think. And there's so much to explore. You need a whole lifetime. So I guess that's what I'm saying. I think that's the biggest change that I've seen in what's considered, in what's collectible today.
You know what, that teed up perfectly my next question as well, because I agree with you. I mean, I love the broadening of the universe of collectible wines, and just the way in which it's encouraging people to really learn about the world and explore it. But to your point about things being very personal, I'm going to kick up another somewhat controversial topic, and I'd like you both to comment on this one, about ratings. So this is also something we think about a lot, both critic ratings on the one hand, and then the crowdsourced ratings on the other. As you know, there are many apps out there that have stars or apples or points or some mechanism for users to assign their preferences. And the challenge that we see is that, you know, the assignment of an objective measure, like a number of stars or points, to something that is really a subjective experience, because my profile, my palette is probably very different than yours and Oz's and everybody else's on this call. It can kind of anchor people in assuming a quality level that maybe isn't true. Maybe they would like that wine. So we've really, you noticed in community reviews, we don't have ratings. We have an upvote system if you see a helpful comment, but we don't have ratings. And it's something we're thinking about a lot, is how does this fit in with the world of wine? So Oz, why don't we start with you? What are your thoughts about ratings, the rating system, either the critic or the crowdsourced methods, and what do you think could be done there to better convey impressions?
The first thing is, I think the world is awash with ratings. A lot of them are crowdsourced, which are fun. Hey, if you were to find some like-minded people you want to chat with and say, I like this, I like it too. Hey, you like it as well. I like it, and he likes it and she likes it. Must be good. That's fine. It doesn't mean a damn thing really about whether the wine's good or not. It just means a bunch of you like it. But one might say a bunch of you like it is basically the reason why you drink the stuff. So I'm not too bothered about all this crowd rating stuff. I personally take it with a massive pinch of salt, and I don't really get involved in it. When it comes to marking, I think that marking has got completely out of control. I think going back to Robert Parker, he used to say again and again, read what I write, stop just doing the marking. But once you're taking the Pandora's box out there and say, hey, this is a dead easy way to take any responsibility out of wine and any responsibility to make a decision for myself, I'm not so sure about wine. It's a 95, it's good. It unfortunately made things so easy. I say unfortunately, but I should also say well done him for bringing enormous numbers of people into this wine world in the first place. I think that the fact that you're not doing those sort of ratings is noble. I think it'll make a much better app because you don't do ratings. I think you would make more money if you put ratings on there, but I'm delighted that you're prepared to make less money for the quality of your app.
Well, thank you for that. But no, that, I mean, those are great points about, the differences in those two. So Elin, what would you say?
You know, I have a lot of very mixed feelings about the whole ratings thing. And I have to say, I'm really down on numerical ratings. I feel like it gives people the idea that if something is 94 or 92, that there's a huge difference between these two wines, when in actual fact, there's probably the difference is whether you taste it on one day or another. I'm more interested in sort of star ratings because I think those are like levels of quality. I mean, everybody sort of knows what, a 1-star meal is, or they know what a 1-star, what critics think a 1-star movie is, or something like that. And it isn't quite so precise. And I really am very sympathetic to the idea that a lot of people want to have some guidance like that, not just a description that may have blueberries and cherries and a lot of other things that they may or may not like. But I also think that it has to do with how expensive the wine is. That if a wine is $15 and it's something new that you've never tried before, an awful lot of people are perfectly happy to take a chance on a $15 wine or a $25 wine. It's when it's a $200 wine that people are sort of looking around like, am I going to like this? Is it worth it? Is it well made? Is it going to age? Does it have a drinking window that is going to repay my spending all this money? And so when it comes to something like a $200 wine, which a lot of people are not just buying every single day, they're not saying, oh, what $200 bottle of wine should I buy today? I feel like some kind of guidance is helpful. Like, what level is this wine? Is it like a fabulous, incredible wine that you should taste sometime in your life? Or is it a wine that's kind of a little disappointing considering that it costs $200? And who should you believe? And, all of these questions, I think, there aren't like fabulous answers for it. I sort of feel like people want consensus, that if Oz and I and 6 other critics that have been tasting wine for a long time agree, hey, you should taste this wine before you die, that maybe they ought to try it before they die. At least I hope so. But I don't know really what the answer is in terms of helping people, because I've seen too many people say, oh, well, I wouldn't want to taste that wine. I didn't buy it because it got 87 points. Well, like, what?
Well,
That doesn't make any sense. Maybe it's a Beaujolais. It got 87 points and it's delicious.
I think it's a great point about consensus. I agree. I think especially with higher spending categories, people are looking for something. And if you and Oz both were to recommend a wine to me, I can tell you right now, I would try to get it before I died. So feel free to compare notes.
We're on the spot on that.
But unfortunately, we're out of time with the panel. I would love to keep talking to you. We'll have to do this again. As I said, it's the first in our series, and we really didn't have enough time to delve into everything that you both know about the topic. But I do want to leave enough time for Q&A. So first, thank you again so much, Elin and Oz. Oz, I know it is very late in the UK. If you're able to stick around for Q&A, wonderful. If you need to hop off, we completely understand. And I'm sorry, are you able to stay? Wonderful.
I'm in the studio tomorrow morning, so I'll just stay for a bit.
Okay, perfect. Well, I will kick it over to Taylor and Sarah to queue up any questions that we've received. And for everybody else, this is the time. Feel free to come off of mute, come off of your, turn on your camera, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have.